The cafeteria buzzed with the ordinary sounds of a tired morning, but for Daniel, a single father who had already spent the whole week fighting bills, deadlines, and loneliness, the noise felt like the distant hum of another world. He sat at the corner table clutching a lukewarm cup of tea while his 6-year-old son, Noah, quietly munched on a small piece of bread because it was all he could afford today, after rent swallowed almost everything else. Daniel kept checking his phone, pretending there might be a message about the job interview he had failed 2 days ago, pretending there might be some miracle waiting for him. And then, just when he thought the morning would pass unnoticed like every other struggling day, he heard a soft tap against the floor and looked up. A girl, maybe 15 or 16, thin and pale but with the kind of brave smile only people who've seen too much pain carry, stood there balancing on crutches. Beneath her jeans was a single prosthetic leg, worn but clean, and she asked in a gentle voice if she could share the table because the cafeteria was full. Something in her eyes, something fragile yet fierce, made Daniel straighten. He didn't know then that this single question, this brief moment, would change his life forever. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and small actions that can change someone's world, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps stories like this reach more hearts. Daniel nodded silently, and the girl carefully sat down. She placed her tray on the table, a single cup of tea, and nothing else. Noah's innocent eyes flicked between her crutches and her face, confused but curious. Daniel noticed the stiffness in her movements, the way she avoided looking at other people, as if she had learned to shrink into small spaces so she wouldn't be noticed, so she wouldn't be pitied. He knew that feeling all too well. She introduced herself as Mira, her voice polite but guarded, the kind of tone used by people who expect rejection. Daniel asked if she was okay sitting there, and she answered that she was simply tired and needed to rest her leg for a while. But Daniel sensed the truth fatigue not just of the body, but of the heart. The cafeteria, warm and crowded, held small pockets of life around them, students laughing, office workers scrolling on phones, people lost in their own worlds. But at that little table, with a struggling father, a quiet child, and a girl who had walked through storms no child should ever face, it felt like time briefly paused. Daniel's heart ached with an unexplainable urge to protect this stranger, who seemed so breakable yet so strong. As the minutes passed, Mira began opening up in tiny fragments. She mentioned she was on her way to school, that she usually didn't have breakfast because she needed to save her allowance for bus fare. Daniel didn't ask for the details, he didn't want to pry, but the way she said it, with a shaky attempt at sounding casual, made him realize that behind her courage was a loneliness as heavy as his own. Noah, who rarely warmed up to strangers, pushed his piece of bread toward her and said she could have some. Mira blinked rapidly, the kind of blink someone does when they are trying hard not to cry. She refused gently at first, but Noah insisted with such innocent determination that she finally accepted it with trembling fingers. Daniel felt something shift inside him. For months, he had been drowning, not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly, the way most broken people do. After his wife passed away suddenly from a medical complication, he had become a parent overnight, a full-time caregiver, a cook, a protector, and a man who felt constantly unprepared for the world. His savings had vanished, jobs had slipped through his hands, and he had learned how heavy silence could feel in a tiny apartment filled with memories. But seeing his son share the little he had with a stranger stirred a warmth in him that he thought had died long ago. A sudden announcement echoed in the cafeteria, pulling them back to reality. Mira checked her watch, panic flickering in her expression as she struggled to get up quickly, almost slipping. Without thinking, Daniel reached out to steady her. She stiffened at the unexpected touch but then relaxed, whispering a soft thank you. Before she walked away, she looked at Noah and gave him a grateful smile that carried a lifetime's worth of unspoken stories. Daniel watched her leave, unsure why he felt so strongly drawn to help her. 2 days later, in the late afternoon drizzle, fate reunited them. Daniel had picked up Noah from school, and they were waiting at the bus stop when he saw Mira sitting on the bench, soaking despite the small umbrella she held. She looked exhausted, pale, and worn out in a way that made Daniel's chest tighten. Her uniform shirt was damp, her crutches muddy from the slippery ground. When she noticed Daniel and Noah, she attempted a smile, but it wavered. Daniel asked if she was heading home. She nodded and explained she had missed her bus and didn't have extra fare for a rideshare or taxi. Daniel didn't hesitate. He told her they would wait together and make sure she got home safely. They ended up sharing the same bus, and Noah insisted she sit beside him. On the ride, Mira finally opened up more deeply, her voice quiet, her hands gripping her bag as if it held her entire world. She lived with her grandmother, who was bedridden. They struggled with medical bills, school fees, and daily survival. Her leg had been lost in an accident years ago, one she didn't describe in detail, but the shadows in her eyes told the story. Daniel listened, not with pity, but with a heart that recognized pain. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer false comfort. He simply listened. Sometimes, that is the greatest kindness. When they reached her stop, Daniel insisted on walking her to her apartment building to ensure she got inside safely. What he found broke him. The building was crumbling, the hallway smelled damp, and the lights flickered as though fighting against the darkness. Mira's tiny apartment was barely furnished. Her grandmother lay on an old bed, coughing weakly, and Mira rushed to her side with tender urgency. It was clear Mira had been carrying more weight than any teenager should. Daniel returned home with a heart full of thoughts he couldn't quiet. He lay awake that night thinking about Mira's fragile strength, her determined smile, her hunger, the coldness of her world, the responsibilities crushing her, and the kindness she showed despite having so little. He remembered his wife's voice telling him once that kindness wasn't something you gave only when you had enough. It was something you gave because it made the world better, even if your own world was falling apart. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel began helping Mira and her grandmother quietly, without making it seem like charity. He dropped off groceries because he had extras, helped Mira with school textbooks because Noah had an old set, and sometimes repaired small things in their apartment because he enjoyed fixing things. Mira understood what he was doing but never said anything, because she had learned that accepting help was also an act of courage. One evening, everything changed. When Daniel arrived after picking up Noah from school, they found Mira outside the apartment, shaking and crying. Her grandmother had collapsed, and the ambulance was on its way. Daniel held her as she trembled, her frail body folding into his as though she had been holding herself up for far too long. At the hospital, the doctors said her grandmother needed treatment urgently, treatment that would cost more than Mira could ever afford. Daniel stood there, torn between his own financial struggles and the desperate, pleading look in Mira's eyes. He knew what it meant to lose someone. He knew the weight of helplessness, and he knew he couldn't let this girl face that pain alone. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, assured the staff he would arrange everything, and handled the initial medical expenses using the last savings he had. Mira stared at him with disbelief and overwhelming gratitude, unable to understand why a man who barely knew her would sacrifice so much. But Daniel understood. The day she had walked to his table in the cafeteria, she hadn't been a stranger. She had been a reminder that kindness connects broken souls in ways nothing else can. The following days were a blur of hospital corridors, silent prayers, and emotional exhaustion. But slowly, Mira's grandmother began to recover. When she was finally stable, Mira hugged Daniel with a depth of emotion he had never experienced before. She cried into his chest, not the soft, controlled tears of someone used to pain, but the raw, uncontrollable sobs of a girl who finally felt safe. Word of Daniel's compassion spread quickly. Neighbors, school staff, and community members began helping as well. Donations arrived, meals were prepared, and people came together like a family Mira had never known. Daniel still struggled with bills and work, but he no longer felt alone. His act of helping another had brought the community's kindness back to him in ways he never expected. Months later, Mira's grandmother returned home healthier than she had been in years. Mira began excelling in school, winning a scholarship, and dreaming again dreams she had abandoned long ago. Noah adored her like an older sister, and Daniel found himself smiling again, feeling a warmth in his home that he hadn't felt since his wife passed. He often thought about that first morning in the cafeteria, the tired girl with the brave smile, asking if she could share his table. She had walked into his life with one question, and without knowing it, she had filled the emptiness in his home, healed wounds he didn't know were still bleeding, and given him a new purpose. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps us bring more real, emotional stories to the world. Before we end, tell us in the comments, do you believe one small act of kindness can change a life?